you need to be able to read the worst things you can think of, like literally worse than you've ever imagined. And you need to be able to see them in your chat room and read them and then keep smiling on camera. Hi, Dr. Jones. I'm so excited to meet you today.
Hi, Mary. How are you?
I'm amazing. I'm really excited to pick your brain because I am an online streamer and I deal with a lot of like kind of hate comments or mean comments on social media, and I already feel like I've gotten pretty good at dealing with them, and I have like 6 years of experience with it, and I feel like I have all these like tips when other models come to me, but I would love to just find out what I'm missing and talk to an expert and see what you have to help me on dealing with that, and also I guess dealing with the effects that streaming and dealing with hate comments can have on like your life.
So all incredibly important issues. And first and foremost, I'm so sorry that you ever have to deal with any of that. And I guess I also want to tell you that you are certainly not alone. I've conducted extensive research on the camming industry, and one really salient theme in so many of the conversations and interviews that I had with other performers was that they're constantly having to deal with online harassment, negative, hateful, racist, transphobic, fatphobic, I mean, you name it, comments online. And you're absolutely right to note that that environment and having to put up with these type of comments can have a really deleterious effects on our spirits and our bodies.
Yeah, I definitely see my fair share of, like, I came into the industry thinking like I can handle whatever's thrown at me, but even me, trying to prepare myself, I've been shocked by some of the comments I get, and I am like a pretty like I have a lot of inherent privilege in that, like, I'm white, I'm cisgendered, I'm thin, so the hate comments I get, are perfectly tailored for me. But if I've streamed with Black performers, and I was surprised because I forgot how intense the racism side of the hate comments is, because I was so used to my particular flavor of hate comments that I personally get. Uh, and yeah, I think it's important to also recognize that it can be even more intense if you're part of a group that is affected by racism or transphobia. That's going to just add another layer onto the standard hate comments that someone like I experience.
Absolutely. One of the things that I heard a lot from other cam models was, something to the effect of, well, trolls come with the job. And so maybe if you could just talk a little bit about your experiences, like maybe give some examples of the type of things that you're putting up with, if you feel comfortable.
Sure. I definitely agree. And when I have a lot of conversations with brand new streamers who will message me and ask me, like, what do I do? Someone sent me this message. I do think it comes with the territory, unfortunately. I don't think it's any fault of the streamer. And I think even if you were an absolute angel, perfect streamer who never made a single mistake, you would still get like the same amount of hateful or hurtful comments online from strangers. And the types of comments, I have a specific warning I give to friends who are close to me. If they say, hey, I really want to start like doing online streaming, either mainstream streaming or streaming on a place like, a more adult platform. And the warning I give is you need to be able to read the worst things you can think of, like literally worse than you've ever imagined. And you need to be able to see them in your chat room and read them and then keep smiling on camera and not let it affect your show, your performance. And usually I feel like models are like, yeah, I got that. But even me, I'm maybe a cynic or a nihilist or something, I don't know. So when I came into the online streaming world, I was like, yeah, nothing can faze me. And even I have moments where I'm like, right, okay. Like that comment happened, cool. And I'll just be like, whoa. And even I get like stuck, and then I'm like, well, that's fine. And then I can continue on with my show, and my whole chat's like, wonder what she read. Like,
Do you actually practice that ahead of time, right? Like, would you say that it's advantageous for performers to actually prepare themselves before?
I don't practice like physically in a mirror, but I absolutely play through it in my head. Forever ago, I read some like headline of an article I didn't actually read, but it was something about like they like, were scanning the brains of Olympians, and those Olympians were mentally like going through their activities, and apparently like their brain was firing as if they were doing it for real. So I took that and was like, cool, I can now imagine anything I want, and and like it'll happen. So I absolutely have sat there and done like the mental exercise of like maybe like re-envisioning a comment I've gotten that was particularly like surprising or like hurtful, or just like shocking, and kind of imagining myself being like this, super like put together, like calm, like the imagined perfect exterior of the most cool, like laid back person ever who doesn't even notice. Yeah, you play through that in your head. And then when it happens, I absolutely laugh at comments or like make faces, but usually they're in like a tip note and my chat doesn't actually know what it is. So me laughing or making a face isn't like, gonna give away what's going on.
Right.
But it's also important to not give the person sending the comment too much satisfaction in your reaction. So it's okay if like you laugh or you're like roll your eyes or like make a face and then like, ban it and then laugh, but don't have the reactions that you're like reacting to the comment. Like don't have it. Yeah. Don't reply, basically.
Yeah. And I was thinking with other performers who might be watching in mind, do you ever find like in that moment it's hard to, you're talking about smiling or, your affect in your body. Do you ever find that it's hard to control, how you're feeling in that moment or your reaction?
Yes and no. So I have been online streaming for about 6 years, and I stream 3 to 5 days a week in different parts of my career. And I used to do 6-hour streams, or sometimes I do 2-hour streams. But my point is that like I spend a lot of time live. But I have a very strict rule with myself where if I am having one of those days where if someone looks at me wrong, I'm going to cry, I do not stream. Because no matter what's going on, no matter how like mentally healthy and strong and like amazing of a person you are, you're going to be, PMSing, or something is going to happen in your life that is, upsetting. You're going to have family members pass or go through breakups, like things that you just can't avoid. And I just don't stream. I will tweet out. I just did it the other day, actually. I didn't sleep all night, and I tweeted, I would like to not be a menace online, so I will not be streaming. Because I know that I will feel like anger or flashes of frustration that I wouldn't normally feel. And that's totally okay. It doesn't make you like less of a strong person. So
good for you.
I basically just don't stream, and I just accept the loss in income.
Yeah. I was just thinking that like part of me is like, good for you that you're able to kind of honor your humanity and your body and your emotional needs in that moment. But I know I've talked to performers who've said, they were being harassed so bad in a particular moment that they just kind of shut off and they shut their cam off and they stopped working. But then they were like, damn, like I was having a really good, day or night. And so it's kind of unfortunate that people feel like one of the only actions that they can take is to stop working, right? Because then there's implications for people's earnings and stuff.
I do have a little bit of advice on that. So for me, I preemptively don't stream. So it's not in reaction to a hate comment. It's I am like, this raw person today. And if someone were to say something, kind of annoying, I might just like go off on them. So I have a slightly different strategy for if I'm actually live and someone types in the chat like, you're a worthless whore. You only do this because you can't amount to anything in life. Like that's a very specifically like annoying comment, right? If it does affect me in the moment, I might ban it or silence it or let my moderator silence it. I do a dance. So I find something in my streaming that I can get into like a flow state in. So for me, I constantly in my streams, I put on music and I do slow strips to like sensual R&B songs, like things that just like fully I can feel it. I get into a flow, whether I'm stripping or not, I'm just dancing. I turn my back to the camera and I do a performance. And for me, I love those performances anyway, so I can like immerse myself in the flow of the song and the way my body's moving and what my performance is. That obviously people have different things. Like maybe they love like jumping around to like a really lively song or something. I just dance, and my stream is used to me doing those teasing movements when it's slow and I'm trying to get people in the room, so they don't question what's going on. And for me, I'm back into the zen and the flow of what I am streaming for.
Yeah.
So that's my advice, is literally like turn your back to the comment and do something else in that moment that you can do live and stay live to like de-escalate your emotions.
That's fantastic. And what would you say about, because I think in the moment, that's fantastic. Are there things that you would recommend or strategies that you employ for after? So let's just say you've had this moment and there are potentially people who are being menacing, as you said, or harassing you afterwards. Are there things that you do?
Do you mean like, so I've definitely had situations where like one person will literally like make like 100 different accounts within an hour.
Yeah.
And then like they just don't go away. They don't relent.
Yeah, relentless.
Yeah, when I have situations like that, and it does happen, it goes through phases. Sometimes I think like it's one person, and then, you know, people join in because they see it happening. So then they start making accounts. Like it kind of creates a thing. I have, speaking specifically on the platform I stream on, Chatterbait, there's apps and bots that I can control the chat moderation so that when someone makes a brand new account, they have to wait 20 minutes before they can talk. And that's like the most I can set it to with the specific app I use. But doing that not only just slows them down, because usually they're making accounts in the moment as they get banned, so they're not like ahead of the curve. They don't have 20 accounts already. And I find entertainment of it. And sometimes I will say out loud to my chat, like, they have to wait 20 minutes in here every time. That's so sad. Like I'll be like, because the hate comment will pop up, and I'm like, you guys, they had to wait 20 minutes to say that. And then I'll ban it, and then go back to my thing, and the room is like, that's weird, like, you think you'd get a life. Like, they start, like, kind of, and that's a more, you know, negative way to deal with it, but I laugh it off as if I'm comparing it to, like, you know, a little kid being like, you're old. I'm like, okay. Like you just kind of, oh, that's silly, if I do reply to it. And then the gray lock, you know, they tire out, they get bored if there's not enough reaction from the streamer for them to, you know, get the excitement from harassing you.
So that's amazing. And from the way you're describing it, it sounds like the folks in your room are kind of lending support and helping kind of reinforce the boundaries that you're articulating.
Yeah, even to the point that I have to tell them to stop sometimes, because they don't have all the experience I have. And so sometimes someone will be trolling or, you know, harassing in the room, and if it's something really small, I'll ignore it. Like if the same person's coming in and going like, you're fat or you're ugly, like just like over and over again, I'll like literally not register, or sometimes I don't even see it, to be honest. Like there's a lot in the chat, and my moderator can delete things in the chat. But sometimes people in the room will like start yelling at them, and I have to be like, shh, like we're not acknowledging that, like shh, stop. But if I myself am like kind of joking about it or like making light of the situation, they will totally jump in and be like, yeah, dude needs to get a life. Like, or one thing I will say when I do like actually reply to hateful comments is I will be like, if it's like really just like over and over again, or, you know, sometimes I'm in a mood where I just can't help myself, I need to say something, but I will say like, bro, we could have been friends. Like, I talked to everyone in this chat. Like, you could have came in here and, like, joined the conversation. It's really easy. And the room will be like, yeah, he could have just, like, relaxed. Like, what is his deal? Like, he's ruining his own day. Like, the chat will kind of just agree.
Yeah. And do you ever find that these type of comments have a kind of cumulative effect whereby kind of later on they impact you in any kind of way?
So I sometimes struggle when performers will come to me with questions like, how do you deal with hate comments? Because I actually found it very, I don't want to say easy to deal with, but it felt very natural for me to deal with it as soon as I started streaming. And I was still shocked by things people said, because like I thought I like, you know, wouldn't be surprised, but then like something's come up and you're just like, what did you say? But I think I have a very, like, my mindset and my natural, like, experience kind of lends me to naturally be able to be, like, okay with what I deal with as a streamer. Mm-hmm. Before I ever started streaming, I worked for 2 years in group homes with, like, foster children. and I was working on my psychology major before that. I did not finish. I couldn't afford school, and I ended up stopping midway through my bachelor's degree many years before I started camming. And my particular mindset has always been, before I even started streaming, that humanity is, a mess. Like, people are crazy. And I've always, this is why, like I say, I might be a nihilist or something, or I don't know what the right term would be, a cynic. Like, in my opinion, horrible things do happen to good people. And that might sound like a very depressing mindset, but life is uncertain. I've seen, unimaginably horrible things or heard about them. So when I came to camming, if someone is sending me death threats, for example, or sending me really violent comments, some of those violent comments, by the way, are not trolls. Like, they really just think that they are sexy talking to me, and they're extremely violent comments. I go, oh, I already know that this exists. I'm not surprised that people think this way. And my little, like, psychology obsessed background is that I try to get to the bottom of what might cause that behavior. And usually what I find is that it has nothing to do with me. And that helps me a lot. And that's the way I saw the world before I started streaming. So when I got into it with streaming, part of the reason, like I said, I don't stream if I'm feeling particularly vulnerable that day, like I'm PMSing or I'm having a really bad day, or like maybe I like twisted my ankle and I'm just in pain and my tolerance is now so low to deal with more pain, even if it's like emotional pain. I just don't stream because like that's a day I can just take away from humanity. I don't have to deal with it, and it has nothing to do with me. So when I am good in streaming, those comments don't build up in my mind because they're not about me. They have nothing to do with me, actually. And they're not like my responsibility, basically, to hold on to.
Yeah. And those are really amazing insights, I think, that you have. And I guess I'm also thinking, it sounds like in addition to your educational background and your kind of work experience, it sounds like you're also practicing a bit of mindfulness. And so, again, I just wonder if, do you have a broader kind of self-care regimen that's also shaping your ability to deal with these comments? Because it sounds like, you've also talked to other performers. I've talked to many performers who, like you, have gotten, and in many cases, serious death threats, rape threats. A lot of the folks I talk to talk about, kind of racialized epithets. I've spoken to trans folks who talk about the amount of like unrelenting transphobic hate that they get, and that for some people that can kind of build up. So I guess in my mind, I'm also wondering, if you're actively practicing self-care or other things that are like really shaping your ability to handle these things so well when they happen.
So my self-care routines and practices have definitely seriously improved in the 6 years I've been an online streamer. And when I started streaming, I was 23, and now I'm almost 30. So like just in growing older, you learn how to handle like your mental health a lot better. When I first started streaming, I didn't have the best mental health routines. I actually was going through like a really horrible time in my life. I was in the middle of a divorce from, frankly, an abusive partner, and I didn't get that divorce finalized until I think 6 months into my camming career. So I was still married when I started streaming. So my mental health and like self-care routines were actually just complete shit when I first started. But I still had that like background like base built into my mind that I'm not responsible for other people's illness or other people's hatred. And there's a quote that there's another performer who, I don't know if you guys know her, she doesn't stream on Chatterbait, but her name is Ginger Banks. She's big on TikTok, Twitter, all that, and she's a sex worker. Her response that I've heard her say a million times when I'm swiping TikTok is, hurt people hurt. So her response that I see a lot, and it always sticks in my mind, is she'll be like, hurt people hurt, so I'm going to say I love you. So yeah, it gets me emotional because like, I get emotional because for some reason I think it's like very difficult to actually give that love. Because it's one thing to close yourself off and walk away, but to actually put forth positive emotions into a hateful context is really, like, it takes a lot of work.
It's really hard. That's really hard. And I think if people can work on cultivating both what we now think of as mindfulness and self-care, both of which I often think of as like these buzzwords that we hear all the time, but I'm not sure that we talk enough about what does it mean to be mindful, which it sounds like you're actively practicing. What does it mean to practice self-care? And so maybe I'll just add, especially for those who are listening and watching, that I tend to think of mindfulness as a critical practice for when we're in a particular triggering moment, and then self-care as this kind of broader set of practices that aid in our overall kind of well-being. Maybe put another way, mindfulness kind of asks us in the moment to kind of turn off autopilot and again become tuned into the moment, this kind of hyper awareness of our thoughts, how we feel, how our bodies feel, what's going on around us. And I guess I also want to say, when we practice mindfulness, I think it requires that we're kind to ourselves, because I think sometimes people can often be kind of judgmental of the way that they're feeling. If people, for example, become overrun by anxiety or anger at these type of comments, right? So, and I don't know if you do this, but like in that moment, if you observe, for example, that you're angry at these terrible comments, right? I always tell people, at least for me, I try to, in that moment, describe how that anger makes me feel, but not that, I'm consumed by that anger and I can't handle it. What's wrong with me? And so sometimes people can often be really hard on themselves. Like, I shouldn't be this angry. I shouldn't be this upset by what these trolls are saying. So again, I don't know if you have any kind of mindfulness practices that you practice either in those moments or even after.
I have definitely developed a lot of, I will say mindfulness is totally a buzzword, but I started getting obsessed with it when I was about 17. I'm 29 now, in a half exactly this month, so almost 30, and when I was 17, I was super obsessed with minimalism. I don't know why. It was just like my particular obsession back then. But mindfulness comes a lot with that. So I am an extremely mindful person, and you mentioned something about like stepping away from like, the immediate reaction. I am a huge believer, and I tell people to try this, is like when you have that like flare of anger in response to something, you just have to give yourself a few seconds between the rise up of emotion and your next reaction, because those few seconds will allow you to look upon your own thoughts. Like it's like a little out of, I know there's like a term for it, but it's like, you step away from your own thoughts and reflect on them, and you understand that what you're thinking is a thought, and it doesn't mean it's true. It doesn't mean that it defines you. It doesn't mean you have to stick with it. Like, my brain yells things all the time that I do not have to listen to.
That's right.
So I think I might not even realize how much I practice mindfulness. I actually was just talking about this with someone last night about, in relationships when you're fighting or arguing, you want to like go and like keep yelling at that person so they understand. But like, that's to serve yourself in those moments. And I was telling someone, like, when you get that, like, because they were saying that like in the moment they just have to do it, like they need to do this thing, and they can't separate themselves and be like, why do I feel the need to do this thing? And I was just saying, like, you have to just slow down and just like stop and be like, am I doing this for myself, or will this actually help my situation? Am I soothing an anxiety, or is this actually going to serve me like healthfully?
Right.
So just yesterday I was telling someone about my own like practices of how I deal with like, when I'm really mad at someone in my life and I have to like get it together and not take it out on them in unhealthy ways. So I do think I practice mindfulness more than I realize. I also have like, everyone hates to hear it, but I work out for my mental health. Like, I am not a mentally stable person naturally. I have various diagnoses. I come from a very unhealthy family. So I have my fair share of like, chemical imbalances, basically. My body is not, I'm not one of those people that just like has never had mental health issues. I know they exist and I don't believe them. I think that I'm like, you have had mental health issues and you just don't realize. Like I have a hard time imagining how. So I work out hard 5 days a week. And if I miss days, I make them up. Like I'm extremely strict. And the workouts don't have to be strict. I just have to physically be in the gym doing a thing for an hour. It can be like air squats and then like I stretch for 30 minutes. I just have to 1 hour, 5 days a week. Diet wise, I, for example, cannot eat sugar right before I go to sleep. I will feel like I'm having a panic attack. So anxiety wise, I can eat whatever I want, but I'm not going to eat a whole bunch of sugar and then do something stressful. I will get anxiety. I also have dogs. If people don't have pets but have the ability to like have a pet in their home, I highly recommend it for anxiety and depression. Not only because like, you know, they're cuddly, warm, fuzzy creatures that love you, but my dog wakes me up within 10 minutes if I do not get up with my alarm in the morning. So at 8:45 my alarm goes off. By 8:55 my dog is like right here in my face, like waiting and making grunting noises. And if I don't get up, she like screams in my face. And she doesn't need anything. She's just like mad. So if you're don't have like good healthy mental health routines, having like a dog will wake you up, make you walk them 5 times a day, make you feed them. You have to provide their health, their food, and it forces you to then become a dog owner who is healthy enough to take care of your own dog. So then you have to get up, you have to eat, you have to make money, you have to keep your house clean. So that's actually one of my little, like if you're really struggling.
Yeah. I mean, and those all sound like such a critical part of self-care, which is going to look different for so many people. And I know you have a background in psych, so going back to a little bit when you were talking about mindfulness, I don't know if this is the term that you were thinking of, but I know I myself practice a specific form of mindfulness, often referred to with the acronym RAIN. So the acronym RAIN, R is recognize, A is allow, I is investigate, and N is nurture. So in these moments where we have triggering moments, right? So somebody is bombarding a performer with negative comments. The idea is in that moment, recognize what's happening, right? Again, observe what's happening. How do I feel, right? How does my body feel? Not just in terms of emotion, right? How does my body feel? Do I feel anxious? Is my body tense, right? What's my body telling me? And again, remember in this super non-judgmental way, right? But then, and then the A, allow, right? So allow ourselves to feel that. I think for a lot of people, there's almost this default, right, in our body and our brain. Our body and our brain doesn't want us to feel pain, right? So we're inclined to block that out, right? We don't want to deal with those feelings. But it's really important to cultivate a practice of allowing ourselves to feel whatever those feelings are. And then the I, once we get to a place where we understand what's happening to us, where we then investigate this kind of inner experience, right? What's happening? What are the triggers that set this off for me? Where we can get a little bit more analytical. And then N, again, nurture. And for me, this is kind of the connection between mindfulness and self-care, which like you, when we were talking about it being a buzzword, I was watching one of my favorite shows like 2 weeks ago. And one of the main characters is like, I feel like everybody has joined a self-care cult and they won't shut the fuck up about it. And in that moment, I remember kind of chuckling, but also thinking that sometimes we do use these as kind of hollow buzzwords. And I think it's really important that we make a connection between mindfulness and self-care. So even if, you know, for me, you said you love the gym. I mean, I love yoga, right? It calms my body, it calms my spirit. But before we can dig into that self-care toolkit, I think we need the mindfulness piece, right? Like we need to be able to know what's going on for us. The same way if we went to a doctor with a particular set, like a medical doctor with a particular set of symptoms, they need to know what's going on with us before they prescribe something. So same thing for us as individuals, right? Like if we're practicing mindfulness, then I can say, okay, I know that right now I feel angry or I feel anxious and my body feels this way. And therefore, I'm going to dig into my self-care toolkit and take out the appropriate tool. So I guess I'm also thinking, are there other self-care practices that you use when you know you need particular, I don't know, again, are there particular self-care practices other than the working out and the dog?
I I think I spend a lot of time in my own head because like I've never heard that acronym before. I know HALT, which is another one I use, hungry, angry, lonely, tired. If I'm like just super mad, I'll be like hungry. Am I angry? Wait, yeah, HALT, hungry, angry, lonely, tired. Yeah, so it's like if can I fix any of those? That is something I use. Rain, I haven't heard, but I like it. I think I spend a lot of time in my own head, in the sense of what was it? It was what was the first one? Recognize,
Recognize,
analyze,
allow,
investigate, nurture. Oh,
investigate,
sorry.
nurture.
Yeah, I do all of those. I have never heard of that acronym before, so I'm like real proud of it. I'm like,
Yeah,
oh, I do it.
it sounded like you were
But
already doing it. I think that's why I brought it
I
up.
I do that. Maybe I've heard of it and like forgotten completely. So I guess I spend a lot of time in my own head. I'm an only child. Like I that is how I self-soothe. I used to write cringy poems. Oh, writing
Don't
cringy
say that.
poems is probably like one of my biggest like I think so without judgment is a big thing. Like
Mm,
there's a lot of I guess like I'm always like going around about because there's too many things that relate to it with me. But in our job as a sex worker, there is tons of shame. Even though I love my job and I do not judge others for doing it, and I did not judge myself for starting it or doing it now, shame like creeps up in a lot of
mhm.
ways in our lives. And so looking back at my own thoughts, actions, and feelings without judgment is huge for me. And I highly recommend being cringy and like sitting down and writing out your thoughts in whatever way, whatever horrible like stuff comes out of your head. Like just write it or like, go through it in your head without judgment. And I think I do that a lot. If I'm especially having like a flare up of like feelings that like I am uncomfortable with. I will basically isolate in a way and go through that practice of not only looking at my own thoughts, but remembering that my thoughts do not define who I am.
Mm,
And you can think something and feel something and not own it. Like that's doesn't have to be yours to keep. It's kind of like holding on to mistakes or holding
yeah.
grudges. Like you don't have to hold on to that.
Mm-mm.
I also saw a phrase years ago that always stuck with me, which was like your first thought is what you were taught and your second thought is what you choose to believe.
Mm,
So that falls into like internalized shame or,
yep.
or dealing with if a hate comment happens to say something that's kind of tender to you because sometimes they accidentally like hit the mark, they don't know you, but sometimes they can accidentally say something that actually is sensitive to you.
Mhm.
Your first initial reaction of anger or defense, maybe that's just like a habit that your brain was taught when you were really young on how to deal with stressful things. You don't have to hold on to that,
Mm,
and the way you feel initially doesn't mean that you're stuck that way. They're
mhm.
just thoughts. Your brain just says things.
Yeah.
I hate actual meditation, like sitting down and like sitting still and like letting the thoughts go by. Like it's
Mm,
torture. I have ADHD. Like I don't want to sit there. So I'll actively do stuff while I like think through. I'll like, do the dishes or something. But yeah, a big part of it for me is knowing that your thoughts do not mean anything necessarily, looking at them without judgment, doing the cringy stuff like writing down your emotions into a journal, talking to your friends or family if you have people you're comfortable with. They're probably not going to judge you like you think they might, and they probably would want to know if you need something to talk about.
yeah.
Like a lot of us kind of hold ourselves back. So I definitely do that a lot. I didn't even know there
Yeah.
was an acronym for it.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, that's also amazing. I mean, I think you just said so much that was so critical and so important, right? Like, and I think you're absolutely right. The stigma that sex workers broadly face is so pervasive and so terrible that, there can be this internalization of that. And so I think what you're describing is also what I understand as this kind of radical self-love, right? And it's really important to be kind to yourself, right? And I think all of the self-care practices that you're describing are also super important. And I think it's important for folks that there's no kind of universal self-care that works for everybody, right? Like you're like, I hate meditation. Um, I have a love-hate relationship with it, but like for me, I find that like guided meditation works well because like you, there's so much swimming around that having a guide is really helpful. I mean, from a kind of clinical or empirical perspective, there's a lot of research that shows that journaling can be really cathartic for people, whether it's cringy poems or streams of consciousness, right? That sometimes just getting out how we feel can be really cathartic for people. There are also, I have found really helpful that there's quite a bit of kind of workbooks on the market, like for people who have trouble journaling that often provide prompts, right? Kind of how do you feel in this moment that can be helpful for people. Absolutely.
Yeah, I did think of one other thing that I meant to mention and kind of forgot. You had mentioned something about people, or like that you need to kind of sit in your emotions and feel the sensations in your body, even if they're uncomfortable. One big thing that I see a lot and I think leads to a lot of like inner turmoil is avoidance of uncomfortable moments or avoidance of basically the bad in life that comes with the good. I am a huge believer that like the world has, like, how do I describe? In order to live your life, you will have to live through periods of pain. And that's just a fact of life. There might be like a fancier quote that like makes more sense. But for me, online streaming, there's so much joy in my creativity and my work and in the community I've built in my chat rooms that when someone comes in with hateful stuff, I'm just like, well, yeah, that's going to get mixed in with the joy. Like, that happens, right? And it's the same with uncomfortable emotions. So if someone is typing stuff in chat that's hateful to me or sending me hateful comments on social media and they like accidentally say something that I actually care about, like they're not just calling me fat because I hear that every day, they're like saying something that I actually do like take as hurtful. That uncomfortable feeling that I experience is fine and normal and you can't avoid them. And so just like ride through it. Like, I don't know, your life is going to have pain and uncomfortable things and uncomfortable truths. And it's much easier if you, I guess, are mindful about the enjoyable
Absolutely.
parts.
And I think that's why I think it's really important. I often kind of jokingly, but I'm very serious when I say this. I believe that everybody should be in therapy, right? Because I think what therapy really does for us is give us coping skills to deal with all of what life throws at us. So the idea is in any moment, say in the context of an online environment, experiencing negative, hateful comments online, we want to pause for a moment and recognize what's happening and specifically how we feel, right? How does my body feel? How does my mind feel? How does my spirit feel? And then allow ourselves, the A, to feel that. And again, with radical self-love and with kindness, without beating up on ourselves, I shouldn't be feeling this way. It's okay, right? And then ultimately end, we want to nurture ourselves. We want to give our body and our spirit whatever it needs to heal. And again, practicing that radical self-love and, caring for ourselves and being kind to ourselves, not beating ourselves up for the emotions that we're having. And again, this is the connection that I see between mindfulness and self-care, in that if we're practicing mindfulness, if we know how we're feeling, if we're practicing brain, then we can dig into that self-care toolkit and pull out exactly what our body needs. And I think it's really important that when we talk about self-care, that we understand that there's no one size fits all. So for some, that's journaling. For others, maybe that's meditation. Therapy is an incredibly important part of self-care. Maybe for some, that's taking long walks or running, right? I mean, for some folks, I say all the time, waking up in the morning and taking your medication, if that's what your body needs, is part of self-care. Some people love eucalyptus baths, right? Whatever those practices look like for you, they're right, right?
Yeah. I set an alarm to take my meds and then immediately lay back down. And that's my self-care every morning.
Right? And I think what's also really important, given how much of a, we hear about self-care and how much of a kind of buzzword it's become, I also think it's really important for us to be critical of all of this self-care discourse, because often I think what we're seeing more of is then people are really hard on themselves if they still face challenges or still feel bad, right? Because then it becomes, well, I wasn't doing self-care right? Or I wasn't doing enough self-care. Otherwise, I still wouldn't feel this way. And so again, going back to that radical self-love and that kindness that we need to give ourselves.
I do think it's important to recognize, because I see a lot of self-help or, that kind of stuff written online, and it does kind of frame it in a way that, like, if you just meditated, you wouldn't have this problem. But that's not reality. It's that it'll take the edge off the problem, maybe, and allow
Exactly.
you some space to figure it out easier. So, yeah,
Exactly.
not blaming yourself for the struggle.
Exactly. Because then it makes people ultimately feel worse, right? That, like, hey, well, if I was doing self-care correctly, I wouldn't still feel this way. And in some ways, absolutely, it places the entire burden for recovery on the individual, and not necessarily implicating the people who are harassing people, or perhaps changes or interventions that platforms should be making, right? As well.
Well, yeah, and like one of my strategies is to simply not stream if I'm having a really bad day anyway, and I'm all raw and like sensitive. And those days are not seen as a negative for me. I see it as like a relief, a break. Like I get to take the day off.
Yeah.
That's good. I need to do that anyway.
Yeah. And giving our bodies that break is really important, right? I think we increasingly live in a society and in cultures that where productivity is like so important, and we need to always be working and we need to always be moving. And sometimes we just need to really listen to our bodies and honor our bodies with what they need in that moment.
Yeah, one piece of advice I've given to people before when they were saying like, but I can't take the day off work. I need, to earn that money or whatever. I always say that, like, if you get your self care practices down and you figure out how much time you need to, like, fill your cup and just show up really ready, the hours you put into work will be so much more valuable.
Yeah.
And I track, when I'm streaming and tracking my income, I track my hourly income, my average. So if I'm happy and filled with energy and creativity and passion, my income is higher per hour. And so technically, I'm not losing anything by taking that bad day off, because I know if I log on in a shitty mood, I'm going to make less money anyway.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I did want to ask your advice on is, I already feel like I kind of know the answer, but it'd be nice to hear it from you and see if my thinking's on the right track. One way I cope with like the hate comments or mean comments I get on social media and in my chat when I'm live is to basically try and understand what is actually happening with that person and why they would do that. And that really helps me remove it from like, it doesn't have anything to do with me. And I usually kind of see it as they are unhappy with themselves, they're looking for a connection, and they've learned that negative outbursts might get them like a spark of connection from someone online. Even if I'm yelling at them about how mean they are, it might like give them like this satisfaction of getting a connection when they're really just lonely or really craving a true connection and they don't know how to get that. I don't know what you think of that theory or how that it helps me cope with it, and I do tell other people kind of understand that it has nothing to do with you as a streamer. It has to do with like their mind as they're writing the hate comments.
Yeah, and I guess I'm also wondering if you find it challenging to practice that in the moment. Yeah.
I see it as a, I guess, personal challenge to have empathy for someone who is hurting you or might be trying to hurt you. I see that as like a worthy effort. I never finished my psychology degree, but like I learned so many things getting halfway through it about how like as humans we don't like to step outside we as humans we don't like to step outside our comfort zones and learn about the other side of things. So I have hobbies like reading political forums that are the opposite of my beliefs. Just to see, I just want to see, like read it, empathize, understand their point, see if I still feel the same about mine. So I do that as well with people who send hateful comments. I've read incel forums or, things that, or the MitGow Reddit subs, men going their own way. And some of the stuff I've read is very focused on how women or women in my position who are these like online creators are a problem and how we're causing them distress and we're affecting the world and their lives negatively and we are actually damaging the world with our actions, me as a streamer and a woman online using my sexuality to get what she wants. So I've gone through and read those discussions with some judgment, but like the attempt to read it and see what they mean. And my practice, I do it to test my own beliefs and opinions and see if I still feel the same way after.
I guess I'm also thinking about and wondering for folks who might be watching and listening who might struggle with finding that much empathy in a particular moment. And so I guess I'm wondering what we might say to people who struggle with finding that level of empathy, right? Like, is the answer to just ban people when that happens for people who can't, again, muster up the empathy for people who are behaving in this way?
So I think it's something that you can't really do in the moment unless you have already thought about it a lot. So I take the time to read forums of people complaining about online streamers. Like, I go to the areas where those people are, or I just sit and like think about the hate comments I've gotten and like, try to like analyze them and figure out where they're coming from. And so I've come to like an understanding or belief that like, oh, I think that they are sending me really angry comments because they're hoping to get a connection with me. They're actually like lonely probably, or they feel they feel insecure in who they are as a person, and their belief system is like a little wonky, and so they think that hateful actions is the solution, and they're doing it for themselves. And so if I come to that conclusion, I'm like, okay, they're doing this because they don't feel well, and this is, what they think will make them feel better. Okay. And then the next time it happens, I'm just like, oh, it's happening. That's an example.
Yeah.
And I don't know any other way except that like you have to practice it when you're not there in the moment.
Yeah.
And in the moment, like the reason I try to do that is because I don't have empathy initially. So it's not that I find it so easy to have empathy for people who are hateful. It's that I felt irritation and disgust and a lot of negative emotions towards the comments I got initially. And I decided to try and understand the other side because I didn't have the empathy. Now I have the empathy or sympathy. I don't know exactly which one, but it took practice.
Yeah.
So I think it's really amazing that you have the capacity to find empathy for people in these moments, but especially for people who are listening and watching who might struggle with finding empathy for people who are engaging in pretty egregious behavior in the moment. I just want to emphasize that for some, the right thing in that moment to do might be to completely disconnect. When people are engaged in that behavior. And so I think it's okay to, again, remove yourself from any situation that feels overwhelming or incredibly toxic and harmful.
I do like totally agree. And I wanted to add before, because I was like, I think I missed saying something that I work hard to try and feel empathy for people who are acting, hurtful towards me, but I don't think it's necessary to feel that empathy. I think it's necessary to do the work to understand their behavior. And I just wanted to like remind anyone who deals with like hate comments or mean comments online that it's important to remember that it's not your responsibility to manage that person's behavior. And it's not your responsibility to respond to it. And you don't have to feel empathy for them. But doing the practice of understanding where they're coming from, going, okay, they do this behavior because like something's going on inside of them, and then they like, if I wasn't streaming right now, they'd be typing it in someone else's chat room. It doesn't, I'm not like the source, I'm just the target for the behavior. And that it's really, like you said, like you can just disconnect. It's not your responsibility to even respond to it or take in those comments. It's not yours to keep. You can ignore them, you can mute them, ban them, you can, not stream when you're feeling sensitive that day or ready and you know that like they'll affect you more. You can do what I do, which is turn around and turn on a song I love and dance instead on stream, because it's not my job to deal with that comment.
Yeah. That's so important. Mary, have you ever reported somebody to a platform, and have you found them responsive?
I did report some death threats to a platform once, and I think I just got like an automated like, "Thank you, we have suspended their account," or like something. Chatterbait, the streaming site I use, I have reported people who like make multiple accounts over several days, and I remember I sent in a screenshot because when you ban someone on Chatterbait, there's like a list of everyone you just banned, and like I screenshot a list because they were making accounts every like 2 minutes, and like the usernames were all the same with like a number and a different number at the end, and it was like just all of them like in a huge list, and I sent that screenshot, and then Chatterbait can IP ban them, which of course there's ways around that if you're a troll online.
True savvy.
But I overall haven't gotten more than like an automated response or a "thank you, we've suspended their account" like kind of thing the few times I have reported stuff. So through talking with you for this last hour, I've gotten so much validation and just information about kind of stuff I already know how to do or already practice. But I'd love if you had any homework for me or anything that you think I should try that I'm not really doing yet. I'd love to hear your advice.
Absolutely. This conversation has been so amazing. And again, it sounds like you are already doing so many wonderful things and have already cultivated for yourself this really amazing set of practices in relationship to both mindfulness and your self-care practices. But perhaps, speaking to mindfulness, it's something that it sounds like you're already practicing. Maybe you specifically want to try the rain exercise and actually implement that. One of the things that I think is also really helpful when we're practicing mindfulness is to also then record those instances in a journal. So journaling can be really cathartic for a lot of people. Again, we have a lot of empirical data that demonstrates that many people find journaling cathartic. If journaling is kind of not for you or hasn't been in the past, there are really amazing workbooks on the market that provide prompts that you can respond to and that kind of guide your thinking as you're writing. What else? I know when we were talking before, you talked a little bit about not always loving meditation. And I think there are lots of different ways that we can approach meditation, as opposed to, I think most of us have this picture of just kind of sitting and om and, in silence. And like you, I often struggle with the thoughts racing in my head as I'm trying to meditate. And so I think we can often turn to yoga in that there's a lot of different forms and practices of yoga. I think very often when we think of yoga, we think of these really fast-paced vinyasas, right? Like you're up in the downward dog and then you're in the cobra. But if we look to practices such as yin yoga, which is more of a slower paced restorative yoga, if we look to yoga nidra, which is a nighttime practice, which can help really calm the body, especially as we prepare ourselves for sleep. One of the things that I love about these varying yoga practices is that they incorporate breath work. So again, teaching us to intuitively connect with our body and using our own breath to calm ourselves down and to relax ourselves. So I wonder if you might kind of think about toying with some of these other yoga practices, maybe, learning some breath work and, cultivating those as some new tools for your self-care toolkit.
I would love that. I don't do any yoga, not because I have anything against it. Just, I know nothing. Breath work, I'm actually huge on because I don't know if I can say I used to have a panic attack disorder because I don't have panic attacks anymore. But I've had like hundreds in my life, and I got to the point where I would feel the symptoms and be able to breathe out and not have a panic attack. So breath work is huge for me, but I've never done the yoga like version of it. I do one hand on belly, one on chest, and you like inflate the belly and like wait, what is it? It's like is it belly first and then now I can't remember. But like you place your hand and you breathe into your belly and then like exhale it all and breathe all the way down. And I feel like if you're not a big believer in maybe mindfulness, or it's hard to wrap your brain around something that seems so abstract, breath work, like, I think it's your parasympathetic nervous system, right? It just, your body can't think it's running from a lion if you're breathing that way. So it just physiologically, like physically changes the anxiety in your body. And it's not only mental. So it's like just flipping a switch on your body. It calms down your nervous system.
That's right.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I'm totally going to try yoga. First of all, I'll probably try everything you said because I have a lot of experience with this stuff, but it's good to not have so much ego and just think that I have it all figured out. Like, I would love to explore yoga and journaling with prompts. I've never done that, and I'm excited to see how much more, like, what is it, like, I always say, like, you need to fill your cup. Like, I'm excited to see how much more fulfilling some of those things can be that I've just, like, never gotten around to trying. So thank you so much. I'm absolutely going to try those things.
Absolutely. It's been such a pleasure. And I think it's really important for people who also may be listening to recognize that there's no one size fits all when it comes to self-care. And so I think just the way you're saying that maybe you will try practicing a little bit of yoga or maybe more breath work. I think sometimes for many of us, we just have to find what works for us, right? Again, we have to begin practicing mindfulness. We need to get in touch with our body and find out exactly what our bodies need, right? So as long as we're listening to our bodies, I think we can cultivate this really amazing set of self-care practices that just improve our overall well-being.